Anyway, so that's the question. Has he committed a crime? Somebody picked your pocket, but he doesn't get any money. Is it a crime?
Yes, the intent is there.
Ah, so we've got two people that understand the intent. So what do you think?
Yeah.
Intent? He committed a crime? Throw the book at him? Good idea. Okay, so let's look at something else. Let's look at somebody else. If I can turn this on.
Did you say?
Yeah.
In 1959, Ralph Dams grabbed his wife Marjorie from a bus stop, put a pistol to her head, and pulled the trigger. The pistol did not fire. Dams was heard to say by two police officers in the vicinity, "It won't fire, it won't fire." Dams was charged with attempted murder because of intent. Was that okay? Is that correct?
Yes.
He didn't even hurt her.
Still, the intent was there.
The intent was there. So we're going to put him in jail for intent. I had a friend that hated Barack Obama to the extent that he wanted to shoot him and kill him. And he told me over and over and over again. Yeah, you know, and he had hunting rifles, so he could have done it. But he hated the man. Not for any other reason than he just hated him. I don't know, this seems kind of a goofy guy anyway. But he despised the man, and he would have done anything to kill him. He said the same thing about Hillary Clinton. He hated her. He didn't, and we could argue politics all day long. It didn't have anything to do with his politics. It had to do with the fact that he despised her, and he would have killed her if he had an opportunity. So there's intent also, right?
No.
Well, he had the means, he had the desire.
What did it mean?
But the action is what
Ah,
makes
no,
it
there was no
intentional.
action behind it. There was just desire.
But couldn't we say the same thing about school shooters too? When they're posting it on social media, isn't that intent? People still act on it to make sure they don't do anything. Would that be the same thing?
Should they be thrown in jail for the same length of time?
Okay.
That's the question. I mean, this is a legal question. If somebody puts on the internet, or on Facebook, that they have a hit list and they're going to go to school and
That's a
they're going to
threat.
blow everybody away. And they've got guns and they've got ammunition, but they haven't made the attempt yet. Now, they have the intent, but they haven't tried to carry it.
But
carry
the
it out.
intent is you carry it out, but
Right, and this is one of the problems with the law. And if you watch these television shows, the police will be sitting there, and they know that this guy's going to commit a crime. They know he wants to commit a crime, but they have to wait until he attempts to commit a crime before they can stop him. They can't just go over and pick him up and arrest him. He has to act. There has to be an act behind it. If there's no act behind it, it's just assumption on their parts. So intent, in both of these cases, of course, there has been an action. Now the other question is, so do we throw him in jail for life because he attempted to murder his wife with a pistol that wouldn't fire? Or do we, well, he could have killed her, I guess.
if the intent is there, then he will carry it out again.
Oh, okay. So the assumption is that if he wants to do it now, he'll want to do it in the future. Okay. So if somebody attempts suicide, which is against the law in almost all states, if somebody attempts suicide, what do we do with them? Put them in a mental institution forever because they're trying to commit suicide? Put them on suicide watch for the rest of their lives? Uh-oh. What do we do with those guys?
That's probably, he's not hurting anything else but himself. There's no threat to other people.
It's still against the law, you can't.
Yeah, but who's been prosecuted? Who gets prosecuted for attempted suicide?
Nobody does, usually because they assume that it's has to do with mental illness.
It's a law only because people think it's morally wrong to take your own life. That's why it's a law. But no one gets prosecuted for that.
Well, if you're dead, no, they're not gonna prosecute you anyway.
So why do you have that law, you know?
It's on the books. Suicide is against the law. And the reason it's against the law is so that they can do something with the individual that attempts suicide. They can put them on suicide watch, they can put them in a mental hospital for a select amount of time until they determine that they don't want to do that anymore. So people do change their minds. Just because this guy tried to shoot his wife one time doesn't mean that in 5 years, maybe he'll be rehabilitated. He doesn't care about his wife anymore. He's fallen in love with his roommate in prison. It could happen.
Sure.
These things happen. People fall in love all the time. The concept of intention deals with the attribution theory. Attribution is the action of regarding something as being caused by a person or thing. Attribution can be understood along 3 dimensions: internality, stability, and globally. And now I'm going to explain what I'm talking about. Internality, which is, this is the only time you'll ever see that word, internality in psych and law. Whether we explain the cause of an event is due to something internal to a person or to something that exists in the environment. Last night, my wife called, and we were having a conversation, and she got mad at me, and she hung up the phone. And then this morning, she called me and told me that the phone, something happened with the phone. She didn't hang up on me. Okay. I assumed that she was mad at me when we were talking. I'm a psychologist, I can figure these things out. So I figured she was mad at me, and I knew why she was mad at me. So I knew it was an internal situation. It wasn't an external situation. If it had been the telephone had just broken down like she said it did, then yeah, it's external. But I knew it was internal. I just said something I probably should have said, and she hung up the phone. You may have noticed I'm a little stressed, and one of the reasons I'm so stressed is because I'm teaching 8 classes. When you teach that many classes, you're kind of in a teaching mode all the time. Okay, so when I was talking to her last night, I was diagnosing one of her friends, giving her an option as to why this individual was doing all these strange things. And she didn't like it. She wanted me to stop. So she hung up the phone. Anyway, internality. So there's a difference between if something is inside an individual, if this is the way they think, or if it's external. My friend hated Barack Obama. It was an internal thing. It wasn't an external thing. He wasn't reading all that propaganda crap coming out of Russia, trying to get Donald Trump elected. He just hated the man. It was an internal thing. Stability, whether we see the cause of a behavior as enduring or temporary. This guy had lots of hates. Was it a stable thing? Yes, he hated select groups of individuals. He hated African Americans. He hated Muslims. He hated a lot of different people. It was a stable thing as far as he was concerned. So if he had done something, it would have been internal and it would have been stable. And the last is global. Globalness, whether we see the cause as specific to a limited situation or applicable to all situations. And in this case, it was a political thing. He was fairly lucid as far as everything else was concerned, but as far as politics were concerned, it was a specific thing. So it wasn't global. He didn't just hate everybody. He hated people because of political reasons. But then again, he was a Vietnam vet. And in Vietnam, of course, it was a totally different situation than anything that we've ever seen before. It was a completely political war. We went into a war and we hadn't been attacked. And here we are, we're killing people for political reasons rather than to defend ourselves or to defend somebody else. Eventually, of course, everything got wrapped around each other. So we were trying to support the government, they were being attacked, so we were trying to support their government. And of course, it became corrupt and it got real ugly after that. Anyway, globalness. An individual who makes internal stable global attributions about an act of misconduct will see an offender as more culpable and more deserving of punishment than a person who offers external, unstable, specific explanations for the same act. So if you're one of those individuals that watches cops, all those guys that go to jail in that television show, a lot of people will watch that show just to see bad people, and of course what they see is bald-headed Mexican, Hispanic gentlemen getting arrested and African-American gentlemen getting arrested, not a whole lot of white people getting arrested. And so they assume that all of that is internal, that it's stable, and that it's global. So they start seeing these people as dangerous. And that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump has been able to demonize the immigrant population. Because he has identified them as their badness as internal, global, and stable. He called them rapists, which was, I found that a little strange, identifying an entire population as rapists. When making inferences about what caused another person's behavior, especially behavior with negative consequences, we tend to attribute the cause to stable factors that are internal to the person. In other words, they are evil. That's one of the things he keeps saying about the shooters. They're evil people. They're just evil people. Well, if we can identify these evil people, we can take their guns and ammunition away. But that's what we have to do. We have to identify the evil people, rather than, wait a minute, this is a normal person that picks up a gun because they get pissed off about something. Or the last guy that in Odessa, he'd just been fired. And they said that there were he had had other problems in the past. But he picked up a gun, a AR-15, and he started driving down the road just shooting people. I know. And he wounded 20 and killed 7, I think. So, or maybe it's 9 by this time. Not exactly sure. I haven't looked lately. Anyway, just started shooting people. Was he evil? Or was it situational? He'd just gotten fired. Same thing happened in Aurora, Illinois. The guy got fired, so he pulled out his 9mm, it was a Glock 12 or something. Anyway, he pulled it out and started shooting people. In the warehouse, he killed, I don't know, 8 or 9 people. And then the police finally got him. And, yeah, kind of a strange situation. So is he evil? He'd just been fired. Is this a normal situation? Is that internal? Is this a stable situation? He always wants to shoot people. The guy in Aurora, Illinois was different. And the reason he was different was because he was African American. Most of these shooters, almost all these shooters are white. But he was black. As curious as that is. But I haven't heard anybody go, oh my God, somebody's armed the black people and now they're going to come after us. Haven't heard that yet. But then again, I don't watch Fox News, so maybe that'll be tonight. Tucker Carlson's still on vacation. We'll wait until he comes back to see what he has to say. When our own actions lead to negative outcomes, we are more likely to blame the external environment for the outcome. If we picked up a gun, if anybody in here picked up a gun and started shooting people, it would be because of a specific situation. It would be an external situation. We're not evil. We know we're not evil. People don't see themselves as bad people. So this gets kind of difficult because most people don't see themselves as bad. Even the bad people don't see themselves as bad. And if there are bad people, as we have seen with serial killers, a lot of times they want the police to catch them. And they tell the police, please catch me, please stop me, I don't want to do this anymore. They know they're evil, so. Those people maybe are evil, but the guy that picks up the gun because he gets fired, he goes off the deep end because he gets fired. Is that an internal thing or is it an external thing? It's pretty much external because there has been a trigger. And that's what the police are always looking for. That's why psychologists get involved. That's why we're always looking at these situations. That's what the group was doing. The interns that Sarah took to George Washington University, that's what they were looking at. They were looking at serial killers and why they do it. The case that they were looking at was the Las Vegas shooter. That was a tough one. We still haven't figured that one out. But we, as Americans, we're always looking for a reason. And of course, the reason that we're given by the president is that they're evil. That doesn't seem to work because they didn't see evil until they picked up the gun and started shooting. So does that mean that we should limit the amount of ammunition or the size of the magazines? This is the biggest question right now. Should we do these things? And we don't have an answer. Or we may have an answer with the next Congress, but not with this Congress, because the president of the Senate, he's not the president, what is he? The majority leader in the Senate won't allow it to come to the floor. So we're not going to get any gun laws until the next election. For the law to have any authority, it must be consistent with people's shared sense of morality. And most laws are, there is a logic behind it. They had a town hall meeting last night. One of the Democratic candidates was saying that they want to put a limit on the speed limit. They want to put a limit on speed limit. Back in the 1970s, Jimmy Carter, when Jimmy Carter was president, he put a limit on 55 miles an hour as the speed limit all over the United States, on every road, which got a little strange because if you're on the interstate, it was 60, I think, on the interstate, and it was 55 every place else. I know, how hard was that to drive 55 miles an hour? And of course, there are old songs you can listen to, I Can't Go 55, there's a song by somebody, I can't remember who sang it. Anyway, they were complaining about the speed limit being 55 miles an hour. Ronald Reagan changed the law. Jimmy Carter was president for 4 years, and during 3 of his 4 years, the speed limit was 55 miles an hour. Ronald Reagan becomes president, and he changes it. He says, I'm going to let the states make their own speed limits. So Montana took off all their speed limits.
Is it still that way?
No, it's not.
I was going to move.
No, it was, they had suggested speed limitations, but it wasn't a speed limit. So if you were on a 2-lane highway, a paved 2-lane highway, you could go 70 miles an hour. If you were on a dirt or gravel road, you could go 60. If you were on the interstate, there was no speed limit. If you went over and the police stopped you, like you're going 100 miles an hour on a 2-lane paved highway, you had to pay $10. And you could pay it right away. You didn't have to go to court. You could just give the cop $10 and take off again, but not go 100 miles an hour. Anyway, really. When consistency is lacking, citizens may feel alienation from authority and become less likely to comply with laws that they perceive as illegitimate. Once upon a time, there was a mayor of New York. His name was Bloomberg, and Bloomberg tried to pass a law that limiting supersizing of drinks. The largest you could have was 20 ounces. You couldn't have anything bigger than 20 ounces. And of course, you've got cups that are 36 ounces. And he also tried to limit sugar drinks. So you couldn't have a 36 ounce Coke. You could have a 36 ounce Diet Coke, but you couldn't have a 36 ounce Coke. He was trying to control was trying to control diabetes, I guess. A lot of people didn't like it. He actually never got the law passed, but he was just proposing that that's what would happen next.
You ever watch Parks and Recreation?
No.
Oh, you should watch it.
It's about Indiana.
Yeah.
Okay, I should watch it.
The lady on there who really tries to do that, she's thinking for like everybody else, and she's trying to make everybody else healthy. And Lily's like, no, like I want my drinks, I want like this burger, and I'm like,
Exactly.
okay, she's trying to help.
She is trying to help. So you were in favor of the lady passing the law?
I think I was, yeah.
Okay. People in New York didn't like you at all. I know, there's something wrong with us. There was a movie one time with, wait a minute, it was Sandra Bullock's first movie. It was a futuristic show, and in that future, cigarettes were illegal, salt was illegal, all tobacco products were illegal, sugar was illegal, salt was illegal, just to keep everybody healthy.
That works.
Meat was illegal. Yeah, because it's so much fatty. Did it work? I don't know, but Sylvester Stallone was in it, and Wesley Snipes was in it. Wesley Snipes was the bad guy, and Sylvester Stallone was the good guy, and he kept, craving hamburgers and wanting to smoke a cigarette, but he couldn't do it.
Is it called The Fifth Element?
No, The Fifth Element has Bruce Willis and that redheaded lady with hardly any clothes on. Didn't make any difference, she's so skinny. She looked like a third grade boy. Anyway, not that that was important. Who else is in that movie? It's just Bruce Willis and that lady.
Who am I thinking, where Chris Tucker has that funky hairdo?
Demolition Man?
Oh,
Where-
Demolition Man, Demolition Man is the name of the movie that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, because Wesley Snipes is, no, it's
Sylvester
Sylvester Stallone's a Demolition Man, because he destroys it. And that's the way he was as a policeman. Back in the day, he just kind of destroyed everything. So they put him in prison. Anyway, yeah, great movie, Demolition Man. Yeah, it's got that one guy with all that really strange hair, and he becomes part of Bruce Willis's group, and of course he's afraid of everything. But it's not Chris Rock. Who is it? It's the guy that can't read. I can't think of his name.
Chris Tucker.
Yeah.
Chris
Tucker.
Chris Tucker. Yeah, he can't read. He just ad-libs all of his lines, as strange as that is. Definitions of justice have changed throughout history. In the Old Testament and in Homer's The Iliad, justice meant something like revenge. That's justice. So somebody kills your brother, you kill them, and then you kill their brother, and that's, everybody's happy. That was blood revenge was the way the world worked. By the time the golden age of Athens in the 5th century BCE, the concept of justice came to be more about achievement of the well-being of individuals. So before it had to do with revenge, and if you read any of the Greek plays, a lot of them are about revenge. Somebody has to die. Usually it has to do with the gods, and the gods trying to make everything even. But eventually, of course, it came to the idea that everybody needed to be happy. So we were looking for happiness. We were looking for well-being rather than revenge. A person will be more accepting of decisions and more likely to believe that disputes have been resolved appropriately if the outcomes seem just or distributed equitably. And that's what we're looking for, equitable distribution. So if we go to court because somebody didn't give us what they said they would give us, we assume that we're going to get what we want. And they assume they go to court trying to keep from giving us what, as little as possible. So we assume that that's what's going to happen. As long as we are in court, and as long as a decision is made, then it feels more equitable. And that's one of the reasons why we have so many court cases. If individuals view the procedures of dispute resolution or decision-making as fair, then they will view the outcome as just, regardless of whether it favors them or not. So as long as the process seems fair, then everybody will be happy, or they will be happier than they would if they didn't go to court, if there was just a select individual that made the decision. So if we had, they do that on the reservation, don't they? Aren't there's some kind of a court where you can go before an individual to decide whether you should get what you think you should get. Somebody stole your sheep, so now you want them back, or compensation. What is that?
Would that be peacemaking?
Peacemaking or peacekeeping? Peacemaking.
Where he goes and you go and talk to this person and tell them what you would like to do.
Correct.
And sometimes they can settle, the peacemakers can settle the issue themselves. Otherwise,
It doesn't have to
choose
go to
to go to court.
Well, that's logical. Well, what if the peacemaker was a relative of the individual that is supposed to, or a clan member?
I would think that person would eliminate himself, or you could ask for a different person. Because when I was trying to decide what to do with my house and my home site lease, because I am getting to be a little over 35, and I chose one of my nieces and we went down to the peacemaker and said, well, I'm this age, I married in here, and my husband is not here now, and I would like to transfer my property over to my niece. What are the rules and what do we need to do?
Okay.
And he explained all of the laws and everything to us.
Has anybody else heard of peacemakers? No?
Yes.
Yes.
Peacemaking.
No? Yes?
I've actually been through it.
Oh, how'd you do it?
Well, instead of the girl getting sentenced and it becoming this big thing, she had just decided because she knew it was her fault and it was a big old ordeal, but she just wanted to just have peace where she was going to leave me alone
Okay.
and I was gonna leave her alone.
Is that what happened?
It was crazy.
So did it work is my question.
I guess, I mean,
Okay.
she's no longer here.
Okay.
I mean, but-
Those peacemaking processes are usually done by people that are not judges,
Right.
don't have any background in legal
Right.
education.
Sure.
It's more or less just a mediator, that's
Sure.
what it is, it's just a mediation. Nothing is really resolved, it's never recorded, so people cannot go back and say, oh, I had a hearing, I have documentation. It's not recorded, so it's a complete failure, I think.
So the guy who did ours, he was a commissioner and it was documented.
Oh.
And it was dismissed with prejudice. Even though it is like a peacemaking, she cannot go back to the court and be like, okay, well, this is what has transpired again.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think it all just depends on the court system.
Okay, well, sometimes it works and evidently sometimes it is a jump ball and sometimes it doesn't work at all.
We had one process where it was an important hearing, it went through the peacemaking process. But come to find out, it didn't work out for anyone that decided that we were going to proceed with the agreement that was put in place during that verbal hearing.
Right.
Years later, we went back to get information on whether it was documented, there was a decision made. They had no recording, so it's different, like she says.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Well, all this stuff is written down. Okay, when you go to the courts, they write everything down. Research shows that when procedural justice in child custody and child support cases is accepted, Both fathers and mothers are more likely to be involved in the children's lives, and this is one of the reasons why they go to court. This is one of the reasons why they forced my daughter and my daughter's baby daddy to go to court in order to argue about what was going to happen with the kid. The other reason they went to court is because the state found out that he wasn't paying child support, and when they discovered that, they got real upset with him because he had kind of manipulated the situation, and so the court wanted to get involved in order to force him to pay child support. 6 years, 5 years of child support. He hadn't paid any child support in 5 years. When fathers lose in their cases, if they believe the hearing was fair, they're more likely to maintain contact with their children. In his case, he is maintaining contact, but there's some negative things that are taking place that I'm really upset about. The thing about the television, letting him watch a movie about a murder, the kid's just completely spooky. Common sense justice refers to ordinary citizens' basic notions of what is just and fair. Researchers have found evidence that black letter laws on the books may be at odds with community sentiment. And of course, that's some areas do not like the whole concept of abortion. And because of that, people are up in arms. They try to do away with the law. Actually, that's one of the laws that people are fighting about right now, has to do with abortion. And that's one of the reasons why the conservatives are trying to load the court so that they can get rid of Roe v. Wade. It's going to be fascinating. It is fascinating to watch. If we lose Roe v. Wade, it would be a tragedy. The other idea is gun control laws. There's a lot of people in the United States that think that our gun control, we have no gun control laws because they don't. It isn't applied to all states. All this universal background check. So there are people that want red flag laws. They want limitations on the size of magazines. They want assault weapons taken off the streets. And of course, the other side is saying, well, if you allow them to take away assault weapons, you allow them to limit our number of bullets we can put in our gun, then eventually they're going to take our guns away completely. The logic, it's one of those logicum ad absurdums. Just one thing doesn't follow the other. But, that's the argument. 3 discrepancies between jurors' intentions and legal concepts and procedures. The common sense context is typically wider than the laws. In a date rape scenario, or when the victim and the defendant knew each other, jurors would be more likely to consider the history of the individuals both together and apart. In other words, they would look at what kind of a person this individual was. I was having a conversation with an individual dealing with this very topic yesterday, and it became very interesting because as far as that individual was concerned, the individual that we were talking about, which is somebody in a war zone, the individual that we were talking about, she deserved everything that she got, was her point of view. And that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, especially since I've been in the military. I've seen these proceedings before, so it just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But her point of view was that she deserved what she got. So it wasn't date rape. It wasn't. She was drunk, which is actually in the military. They wrote a law, when was it, 15 years ago, that if somebody's drunk, they can't give you consent to have sex with them. So in the military, if somebody's drunk, you can't have sex with them. It's like against military regulations. You could be prosecuted for rape if they decide to bring charges against you. Of course, in the old days, that was the technique, that was a seductive technique that men used. They would get women drunk and then they would have their way with them. And there was no laws, of course, but now, of course, you can't do that. Anyway, this was a really kind of an interesting conversation. It lasted for a while, and I don't think I ever convinced her that the individual deserved what she got. Three discrepancies between jurors' intuitions and legal concepts and procedure. Common sense perspectives on the action of a defendant and victim are more subjective than the law allows. Jurors do this by stepping into the shoes of the defendant and viewing the events through the defendant's eyes. And my brother was on a jury at once upon a time, and it was a murder case. The individual, let's see, how did this work? It was a domestic violence situation. The lady attacked the man, and she was stabbing him, and then she pulled a gun, and she threatened to shoot him, and he took the gun away from her, and while he was pulling the gun away from her, she was shot. So the question was, is it first degree or second degree murder, or is it just circumstantial? Is it, was he defending himself? That was the question. And of course the prosecution said, no, he murdered her, he meant this, it was intentional. The prosecution said one thing, the defense of course said, no, he didn't do it. So my brother was on the jury, and they were ready to throw the book at this guy, and he said, wait a minute, he fired the gun upside down. He fired the gun upside down. So how could that possibly be intentional? You can't, guns aren't even constructed so you can fire them upside down. You have to have your hand like this. But they were struggling over the weapon, and he pulled it away from him. And when he pulled it away from him, it flipped up, and at that point it was discharged. So the question was, and there were lots of questions. One of the questions, one of the things that they didn't even talk about was what kind of a trigger this weapon had. It was a pistol. It was a 38 pistol, but it had a hair trigger on it. And of course, nobody even talked about whether the trigger was a hair trigger or not. So he got the weapon, and they didn't test fire it, but they dry fired the weapon. And they realized that if you put any pressure on the trigger at all, then it gets ready to fire, and then just a bump would make it fire. And that's what they determined. So they determined that it was self-defense. But of course, that didn't have anything to do with the case that the lawyers weren't saying anything about self-defense. They weren't talking about the struggle that they were in. They didn't talk about the weapon with the hair trigger in it. But my brother did all this so he actually tried the case in the jury room. And now he's banned from being on juries in Delaware County. Well, he didn't follow the instructions of the judge. The judge told them that they could just, they needed to look at the case as it was presented by the two lawyers. And my brother said, that's silly. This doesn't have anything to do with what happened. So then he tried the case himself in the jury room, and they acquitted the guy as self-defense. Okay, so, and that's what he was doing. He was stepping in this guy's shoes. He was seeing himself. He wanted to see exactly what had happened between the two of them. There was a lot of evidence that they couldn't present, and of course they didn't deal with that evidence, but they dealt with what they had. And of course they had the weapon. They knew that the weapon was fired upside down. They knew that the lady had stabbed him a couple times with a butcher knife, that she had only one mark on her, and it was a defensive mark where she had come at him and he had hit her with his forearm. And that was the only mark she had on her, but he had all kinds of cuts and whatnot on him. So it looked fairly cut and dried as far as my brother was concerned, but as far as the prosecutor was concerned, this was happenstance, that none of this had anything to do with anything. Anyway, three discrepancies between jurors' intuitions and legal concepts and procedures. Jurors take a proportional approach to punishment, whereas the law asks them to consider the defendant in isolation. In an armed robber, if an armed robber kills a clerk while in the act of a robbery, the felony murder doctrine states that his accomplices share culpability with the murderer. The getaway driver, the watcher outside, the person in the back holding open the door, they are all murderers as well. That is the law. It doesn't matter what you did, it matters what happened in the situation. So if somebody gets murdered, you're all murderers because you all have culpability. This is the law in about half of the states in the United States. So if the getaway driver gets exactly the same thing as everybody else does, that's the law. Does that make sense to you?
I think it does, because you're part of it, so, or it's like, would it be the same thing as like, you just let it watch it, or you watched it happen?
Didn't see it. It was outside. This was inside.
But you knew what was going on.
You were part of the robbery. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I actually have an example of that. There's this girl that I know, and she drove two guys, and I know the guys, I grew up with these people, to her stepdad's house. She was dating one of the guys, and they were intoxicated, and she was talking about how her stepdad still tries to molest her and all this other stuff. And her boyfriend got really mad, and so she drove them over to her stepdad's house, and they had a shotgun, and they tried to tell him to come out, and he wouldn't come out. So she was texting her stepdad, and the other guy went also to their door, and they just, barged in, and they shot him with a shotgun. And so he died, and they all got charged with first-degree murder.
Sure.
But because she was 18 and these other guys were in their 30s, they plea bargained her charge down to a manslaughter charge. And in the end, she got a 1 to 15, and they got 25 to life. So,
Okay. So they plea bargain.
yeah.
Okay. Which is a possibility. You can always plea bargain. What do you think? Does that make sense to you, that everybody gets the same kind of deal?
No.
I'm innocent.
I mean, if a person is involved in a murder like that, it would be considered. It would be the person that had the intent to commit that murder. Now,
That
if
was the
someone was
shotgun,
just,
not the other two.
yeah, the
Because
person
one guy
was just
broke
there.
open the door so that he could get to them, and she was texting. She was texting to get the old man to come out.
Oh, okay, well, then there was an intent there is an intent.
Everybody seemed to be on the same page in this case. If you're outside and you don't even know what's going on inside.
Then that's different.
totally different. With a shotgun, it wasn't just one of those. Well,
Yeah.
what do you think? Good or bad or good?
I guess it just depends on the situation, because
So in this case, all three of them are there's an action with all three. What about the case with one guy goes into the store and shoots the clerk, and the other guy's just sitting out in one car waiting. Is he as guilty?
yeah, that one kind of seemed a bit extreme.
Okay.
So it's not like you really have a reason to kill him. I mean, besides the act of robbery, but
Right.
still, you shouldn't have killed him in
What do you
the first
think?
place.
Yes, no? You're a lawyer. What do you think? Does it make sense to you? I'm guessing she was able to plea bargain because there was the accusation of molestation. I'm
Well,
guessing
I
that's-
think what happened was they took her age into consideration. She had just
Oh, she's
graduated
only-
high school. She just turned
And
18.
the other two guys were 30.
They were older. And the state needed, they used her, they turned her against, both
She
of them.
prosecuted, or she
So,
testified against.
testified against them. And
Ah,
so,
wow, she dropped it down.
and what sucks is like, is that I went to school with the two guys, and it's just like, one of them is just like, I don't know. You just can't really be too sure of people, I guess. But, you know, it's just
So are you
not,
saying he was a nice guy?
it's just not something that I think that he would do, but also they were intoxicated, you know, and I'm sure they were doing drugs. I don't know if that has any, you know, who knows?
Turns out that it doesn't.
Uh,
If you commit a crime while you're drunk or under the influence, it's still, the crime is still.
yeah,
Okay.
so it,
The fact that you're on your mind or whatever.
yeah.
Go ahead, lawyer. What do you think? Does it make any sense to you that these guys should get the same thing, the same time in jail?
Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious. Should they get the same time in jail? They didn't know anything about it. They didn't even know he had a gun.
They didn't know, the driver did not know?
The driver had no clue. He just thought he was gonna go in and rob the guy. He didn't realize he was gonna shoot the clerk and kill him.
Well, it was an intent to commit the crime, and he was aware of it.
He was,
Whether he
okay.
had knowledge of the gun or not, he's still part of the crime,
So
and he should also receive a sentence.
charged with murder. Okay. All right. Just curious. Oh, you guys are mean.
No, we're particular.
We're good lawyers, you're all good lawyers. Disputes that reach the legal system are often, though not always, resolved in court. New community-based alternatives to standard prosecutions are increasingly used. Drug courts, if somebody, and we had this problem in the United States, we're incarcerating all these individuals who were using drugs, and our jails were packed. So now we have liberalized our laws. We have drug court, now we send them to rehab rather than to prison. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Diversion to an alternative system may occur upon one's first encounter with a police officer or when the case is referred to any of several problem-solving courts, and that's drug courts. There's a bunch of different courts. We're going to talk about them later on in the semester. State court systems are typically divided into lower courts, trial courts, and appellate courts. Lower courts have jurisdiction over matters such as probate of wills, administration of estates, family matters, and cases involving juvenile offenders, the less severe cases. We're not talking about murder here. Family courts handle cases involving divorce, child custody, and child dependency. Juvenile courts deal with legal questions concerning delinquency. All states have a law that an individual will accumulate, they will accumulate information on that individual. If they are underage, then it's all locked. Nobody can get to it, and as soon as they turn 18, it's locked away forever. The only way that you can open it up is if they do something later on that has something to do with what has happened as a juvenile. I had a friend that he wasn't murdered, but a friend of his was murdered, and the individuals that murdered the individual were put in jail. But as soon as they turned 18, they released them from jail. At that point, they had to decide whether they wanted to retry them or not. They could have retried them as adults to decide whether to keep them in jail or not. But the state of Indiana decided not to do that. I had a cousin who murdered a guy in Illinois. Yeah, he murdered him in Illinois. This gets really weird because he murdered the guy in Illinois, and then they threw him in the trunk of the car and they drove him to Indiana. And they dumped the car in Indiana. So it became a murder case in Indiana. As weird as that sounds, because nobody knew where the murder took place. So they found the body in Indiana, so they started looking for everybody. There were two people involved. One of them was 19 and he was 17. My cousin was 17. So my cousin, because he was underage, went to Ohio. And Ohio doesn't extradite juveniles.
for a capital crime. So as long as he stayed in Ohio, he was okay. The other guy who had actually done the murder, he dropped a dime on my cousin. So they were looking, they were trying to catch him. But they couldn't catch him because as long as he was in Ohio, and of course, policemen from Indiana can't go into Ohio and arrest him unless Ohio allows them to do that. Of course, Ohio wasn't going to do that because they didn't extradite juveniles to states where they could be charged with a capital crime. Now, this is how smart my cousin is. Are you ready for this? He came back to Indiana. You want to know why? Girlfriend. It wasn't even his girlfriend. This is the weird part. He came back to see a girl who had forgotten about him and was dating somebody else. He came back to Indiana. Of course, she called the cops because he's harassing her. So she calls the cops, and of course they pick him up, and then they try to murder. I know, that's how dumb the guy is. It's worse than that, because he was 17. As long as he was 17, he was underage. Now he was, he was 16. He was 16 when the murder was committed. So now he was 18, and he could be tried as an adult. If he had stayed in Indiana and had gone to court at 16, he would have been released at 18. Now he's in prison 25 for life. There's not anymore. He's out of jail now. But that's how dumb it is. I come from a family of really bright people, but they're stupid, okay? They do dumb things. He came back to Indiana because of love for somebody that didn't even like him. That's how dumb he was. Okay. He was in jail for, 15 years or so. Even though it was 25 to life, of course, the jails were full. Most murder trials are seen in state courts, whether they're have national coverage or not. O.J. Simpson is a good example. O.J. Simpson, of course, was being tried for the murder of his ex-wife, and the guy that happened to be there when she was murdered. Casey Anthony, of course, the question was, did Casey Anthony murder her 4-year-old daughter? They found her in a swamp, wrapped in a plastic bag. Casey Anthony, of course, was out partying while they were theoretically looking for her baby. She got real upset. And there's a lot of really strange things about this case. The father testified against his daughter. He said he thought that she did it. She was acquitted. Eventually she was acquitted. And of course the mother said that she could never, there's no possibility that she would ever injure her daughter, even though she spent a lot of time away from her daughter, having a good time. And the daughter seemed to be in the way. She had said this several times. She had a new boyfriend. You know, it gets really ugly. Anyway, that case had was in the national news as well. If Jeffrey Epstein hadn't committed suicide, that case would have been a national case, despite the fact it was in New York City. And of course, it didn't have anything to do with anybody other than people in New York City. Trial courts typically decide any case that concerns a violation of state laws. Most criminal cases, for example, those involving drunken driving, armed robbery, and sexual assault, are tried in state trial courts. This is a pretty nasty picture. This guy bends over and he falls right on his head. I think maybe he was a little inebriated. State court systems also typically include one or more courts of appeal and a state Supreme Court. So there are state Supreme Courts in every state, and of course they can appeal the case in their state. Federal courts include trial courts, appellate courts, and U.S. Supreme Court. Federal trial courts are called United States District Courts. There's at least one district in every state. Federal appellate courts are called the United States Courts of Appeals.
And these are the courts of appeals. As you can see, Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi have their own court. This is, what is that, for 7 states. That includes 7 states. California is the largest state in the union, yet they're connected with Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, Idaho, Washington, and Montana. Why in the world would there only be 3 states down here in Texas? Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Why in the world would they get their own appellate court? Appeals court.
Of crime?
Yeah, well, they're the ones that execute more people than anybody else.
So you don't mess around then.
So everybody else is pretty small. New York has its own. New York, Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts, I guess. No, Massachusetts is up there with Maine. That's number 1. There you go. Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin have their own as well. That wasn't me, was it? Was that you?
Yes,
Okay, all right.
it's just messages, no panic.
Illinois has got a lot of problems as well. There are 13 federal courts of appeal divided into geographical circuits. Appeals are assigned to 3-judge panels, and of course, Trump doesn't like this because he keeps losing it on appeal. People will take it to the district Supreme Court. The whole deal with the oil field going through, the oil line going through North Dakota, that was taken to a court of appeals. And he lost, and he keeps losing, and he doesn't like it. Of course, it's a 3-judge panel that we're dealing with, and it's the legal system that he doesn't understand. These 13 groups of federal judges examine the record, the documents that the lawyers believe the judges need in order to decide the case. They read the briefs, the lawyers' written arguments. They listen to the oral argument, the lawyers debate about the case before they vote. They decide the case by majority vote. One of the judges writes an opinion explaining why the court decided as it did. So very often you'll get a 2-to-1 decision, but you always get a decision. They can't abstain. They have to vote. So it's either a yay or nay. Sometimes it's unanimous, not very often. Usually it has to do with conservative and liberal justices. Normally there's not just conservative justices on the court or liberal justices on the court. A lot of this has to do with where the case is heard. This Court of Appeals is relatively liberal. Everything in the Northeast is fairly liberal. This section is fairly moderate. This section is moderate. This section is conservative. This section is conservative. And of course, the Southern Courts of Appeal are conservative. So it really all depends on where it goes to court as to whether it will be decided one way or the other. And that's what he doesn't like, because you appeal it in the area where the problem is. 9 justices make up the United States Supreme Court. Once upon a time, we had a president that tried to load the court. He said, we've got 9 justices, but they're conservative. I want liberal justices. So he tried to add 4 justices to the Supreme Court so that he would get decisions that he liked. This is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Didn't work. The 9 judges, decided he couldn't do that. He couldn't add those other 4 judges. And of course, so we've had 9 ever since. At one point, we had 8 judges. Judge Antonin Scalia died while he was in office, and we only had 8 justices. This is when Barack Obama was president. You may remember this case. So for a year and a half, we only had 8 justices because the Senate wouldn't vote on Barack Obama's nomination. They wouldn't allow it to come to the floor. They wouldn't allow the vote to happen. So they waited until Trump was elected president, and then they filled that seat with Neil Gorsuch. Can they do that? Well, evidently they can, because they did. So it was kind of a dirty deal if you were a liberal, but if you were conservative, you were going, yes. The Supreme Court also has the authority to review state court decisions that involve constitutional or federal law issues. A lot of times, someone will try to take a case to the Supreme Court, and they will refuse to listen to it. And the reason is because it doesn't have anything to do with federal law, it doesn't have anything to do with constitutionality. So the state courts are allowed to make decisions. If those decisions only deal with that state, then the Supreme Court will not hear the case.
What would be an example of a case that would come before the Supreme Court?
Although Roe versus Wade is a good example. Roe versus Wade started out in Texas. And it started out in Texas, and the lady said that she had a right to make a decision as to whether she wanted to keep her baby or keep her pregnancy. And the Texas Supreme Court said, no, you don't. The law of the state says you can't have an abortion. It's illegal. And of course, the federal law said exactly the same thing. So then they took the case to the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court, and they decided it on First Amendment rights. It had to do with First Amendment, the right to freedom of speech, freedom of action. And that's when they passed Roe v. Wade. This is in 1973. There was no abortion before, no legal abortion.
So she ended up getting an abortion.
No, by this time she'd already had the baby. And the baby was like a year and a half old. It was a test case. We do these kinds of things. We do test cases. So in her case, she had the baby, went ahead and had the baby. Now the lady that was the test case for Roe v. Wade is against Roe v. Wade, as weird as that sounds. Which isn't, Roe and Wade don't have anything to do with this. They were both bonus names. Brown versus
So Roe versus Wade, now Roe is who and who is Wade?
Wade, Roe was her, and Wade was the Attorney General of the state of Texas. How about that?
So it was not like Roe versus the state of Texas?
No, it was Roe
Was it-
versus the Attorney General of the state of Texas.
Interesting.
Because the state of Texas, it was the Attorney General that she sued. She sued the Attorney General to allow her to have a legal abortion. But now they've gotten around the whole abortion issue, which is kind of curious.
So Roe kept the baby?
Yeah, well, she had to have the baby, and I think she kept. I'm pretty sure she kept.
I wonder if the federal government is providing her, or how did that work out? In the end, because they ruled in her favor.
Right, but by that time she'd already had the baby.
So I wonder how the baby feels about all this right now. Because I'm sure they're grown up by now.
Oh yeah, they're in their 30s now. There was a little girl that I remember her.
So was there any kind of settlement regarding this?
No.
No?
No. Didn't have anything to do with money. It had to do with legal abortion. Of course, at that point, they started opening up abortion clinics all over the United States.
So was she on birth control at the time that she got pregnant?
Birth control was against the law until the 1960s.
But this was
It
in
wasn't very
1970.
common, especially in the South. It wasn't very common until the 1970s. So this really didn't have anything to do with birth control. Planned Parenthood started distributing pills, okay? They started distributing condoms and pills and whatnot, trying to control people's trying to support people's reproductive rights. Before the 1960s, women weren't allowed to use birth control. That's the word I was trying to think of before. They weren't allowed to use birth control. You had to buy a condom. If you wanted to buy condoms, you had to go to the drugstore. And it had to be prescribed to you in order to buy condoms. Now we distribute them, and there's whole boxes of them for people to use. But before that, you couldn't use condoms were against the law, birth control pills were against the law. You know, all these dams were against the law. I mean, everything was against the law, as bizarre as that sounds. But then all the laws changed. They became more liberalized. In 2005, the California legislature passed a law banning minors from buying or renting violent video games. Video game companies took the case to the United States Supreme Court, and the law was overturned 7-2 as unconstitutional and an infringement on free speech. In other words, that's your First Amendment rights. So a kid, no matter how old this kid was, he could play all the video games that he wanted. It had been a law that they passed only in the state of California. It was a test case, once again, it was a test case, and they lost. First Amendment rights, they have the right. And this is why pornography is legal. Pornography is legal because of First Amendment rights. If you go onto a site that is a foreign site, it may ask you how old you are, if you're old enough to be on that site. But if it's one in the United States, they don't even ask you. You can just jump right on and watch whatever you want, look at all the movies you want. Terry Schiavo suffered a heart attack when she was just 26 years old. She had weight problems. So she was a yo-yo dieter. She was bulimic. She turned anorexic from her bulimia, and she had a congestive heart failure. She collapsed in her home. Her husband found her unconscious and not breathing. He called the EMT. Took them about 5 minutes to get there. He was working on her, but by that time she was brain dead. That's what happened with Terry Schiavo. She had the heart attack in 1990. She was diagnosed as being in a vegetative state. She was placed in hospice care, and she was maintained until her husband decided that enough was enough. In 1998, he decided to pull the plug. But the story's not over with yet. Both of Terry's parents, the Schindlers, decided that Terry should not die, and they appealed to become caretakers for their daughter. They claimed that she had lucidity to some extent. She was not in a vegetative state. In 1998, when Michael Schiavo went to court to have the feeding tube removed from the Schindlers counterfile, saying that the feeding tube shouldn't be taken out. The judge decided in Michael's favor, as did the appellate court. The question was, who has control over a spouse? Is it the parents of the spouse, or is it the spouse themselves that have control? That was the question. That was the only question. The judge decided in Michael's favor, as did the appellate court. The Schindlers tied the decision in appeals for 5 years. He tried to have the feeding tube and hydration tube pulled in 1998. For 5 years, it was in appeals. When they again lost, they went to the governor, who was Jeb Bush, the president's brother, who actually blocked the courts. He wrote a governor's decision, and he decided that the feeding tube should be allowed to stay in Terry Schiavo. But the question is, can a governor do that? Does a governor have that kind of power? Bush responded to their appeal by appealing to the legislature to write a law that he immediately signed blocking Michael from pulling the plug. So now we've got the state legislature of Florida involved. The governor is involved, now the legislature is involved. Michael sued the governor and the legislature, and the courts agreed, and the feeding tube was once again pulled. So the courts are deciding for Michael, and the legislature and the governor are against it. They don't want the plug to be pulled. However, the United States Congress passed a law specifically to put Terry's tube back in, and President George W. Bush signed it into law. So now we've got the federal legislature involved, and also the president. They wrote a law specifically for Terry Schiavo to keep the You think I'm kidding? This thing is exploding all over the United States, and people are punching each other, killing each other, trying to get Terry Schiavo either to have the tube pulled or to have the tube allowed to be stayed into her gut. The bill demanded that the Florida courts look at the Schindler's case. The courts, of course, have decided for the husband every time, for Michael Schiavo every time. So they decided that the Florida court should look at it again. And guess what they decided this time? The same damn thing, of course. Why would they change their mind at this point? So this is in 2004, they finally decided that, of course, the court decided to go ahead and pull the plug. The plug was finally pulled. And the question was, and the Schindlers argued that when the mother came in, that Terry Schiavo responded to her. So she thought that there was something going on in her brain. The doctor said, no, there's nothing going on in the brain. That's one of the reasons why there were so many arguments. There was a medical argument, there was a political argument, there was a moral argument. I mean, everybody was arguing about Terry Schiavo. Now, I'll look at it from a different point of view. And the whole country was up in arms, trying to decide what to do with Terry Schiavo. I mean, the feds got involved, the Supreme Court kicked it back to the federal court, or the Florida courts. And of course, the Florida courts decided exactly the same thing every time. Who has a right to pull the plug? That was the question. And the answer was, and the answer is, as it is all over the United States, is the spouse.
So that's the law.
That's the
your
law.
spouse.
It's your spouse. So don't marry somebody that doesn't like you, or they'll pull the plug, whether the plug, there's a plug to be pulled, so be careful who you marry. Which reminds me of the story. Once upon a time, I was going into a combat zone, and at that time, we had $35,000 worth of insurance. If we died, if we got killed, then $35,000 worth of insurance. So my wife, at the time, who has this amazing ability to see into the future, knew that I was going to die in combat. So she starts spending the $35,000. She starts borrowing money from everybody. She gets all these loans, $35,000. Anyway, I didn't, well, obviously, I know. She was a little upset.
Did you pay back the loan?
I had to. I had no choice.
What was that discussion like?
Wasn't much of a discussion.
So how did she know that you had a $35,000 life insurance?
Oh, all military people have $35,000 life insurance.
This is your first
Which
one
wife?
after or while they're active?
No, while they're active duty.
Which wife is this?
You can actually buy into the insurance policy as a life insurance.
Which part of this?
That's number one.
Number one?
Yeah, they're just
So
shocked.
thereafter, how long did your marriage last?
4.5 years.
What?
And then,
We were married for 4.5 years.
How long did you know her before you married her?
She was my high school sweetheart.
during the time of your 4 years, when did she decide that she wanted to
Sorry?
borrow money to get your insurance? How many years into your marriage?
Oh, my goodness, just before she left. You never heard the story of when she stabbed me?
No, she stabbed you?
Yeah.
Was that with an intent?
That was intent.
Is she in
I got
jail?
the scars to show you the intent.
Is she in jail?
No.
Why not?
Well, we were in the military. In the military, I was in the military, she wasn't. But I was in the military. In the military, you are responsible for your spouse. So if I had gone to the emergency, I didn't even go to the emergency room. If I'd gone to the emergency room, they would have arrested her, they would have kicked us off base, both of us off base, and of course I would have gotten a letter of reprimand for allowing my spouse to be violent. you can get in trouble for your kids doing things when you're in the military. If my kids vandalize something, I'm the one who gets in trouble, not them.
Only up to 18, right?
Only up to age 18. Well, at that time it was
So after she stabbed you, what was that like? You guys just went to sleep? Obviously, if you didn't go to the hospital and she
18.
didn't
No,
go to
this is what
jail.
happened. She spent all my money. I just got paid. And this is when the military got paid once a month. So she spent everything. I got paid that day, and she spent all my money that day. Not on food, she spent it on paint products so that she could paint pictures. And she's not even an artist, but this gets worse. So, and of course I was a little upset, and I started arguing with her, and she got a steak knife out of the drawer,
Yeah.
and she stabbed me in the arm. Once in the leg, a couple times in the arm. And my daughter, the only thing that stopped her from stabbing me more was that my daughter got it between the two of us. You know,
And
I'm
you were
trying
just standing there?
I'm trying to fend her off. Well, I'm trying to fend her off, but it's kind of hard when somebody's stabbing her.
You must have really loved her.
And that, of course,
For 4 years.
so that night we were still arguing, and I went to sleep, and the next thing I know, I got a knife in my chest. She'd stab me again, in the chest, right over the heart.
She's trying to kill you. That's just murder.
She was trying to get her 35,000.
She's like, you don't understand, I already spent the money first, there's no
I
other
don't-
way.
I don't know if she would have gotten the 35,000 or not. Why don't we stop right here? Anyway.